Hi, I'm Erin Power.
And I'm Laura Rupsis.
We're certified health coaches, and this is Health Coach Radio.
This podcast is about the art, science, and business of health coaching.
We share our insider tips to help you become a better coach and entrepreneur.
And we interview expert guests to discover how they've made it in this growing field.
It's time for health coaches to make an impact.
It's time for Health Coach Radio.
Today's episode is brought to you by the Health Coach Success Virtual Masterclass. My co-host Laura and I worked hard to pull together this special online event just for you. It's a 5-day mini course in which we interview the best and brightest health coach and marketing experts on the planet to try to understand how they've become such great coaches and entrepreneurs. Included in the 20-plus expert interviews are some names you might recognize. Primal Health Coach Institute founder Mark Sisson, celebrity nutrition expert and New York Times bestselling author J.J. Virgin, author, cardiologist, and staunch health coach advocate Dr. William Davis, Michelle Liotta of Health Coach Power Community, Michelle Norris, CEO of Paleo FX and ID Life Nutrition, and many, many more. The Health Coach Success Virtual Masterclass is now available and totally free for a limited time. Check it out at primalhealthcoach.com/success. Today we're chatting with Robb Wolf. I don't even know what to say about Robb Wolf. He's the man. He's been an inspiration to me and many of us listening to this podcast. He's the author of a few very important health books, including his most recent must-read book for anyone working in the food and fat loss space, Wired to Eat. Robb's been a thought leader in the health space for more than 20 years. About a decade ago, Robb was instrumental in running a pilot study with the police and fire departments of Reno, Nevada, wherein those at risk for type 2 diabetes and other metabolic illnesses were coached through relatively simple diet and lifestyle modifications that stopped and in some cases reversed potential disease states. These results were estimated to have saved the city more than $22 million, which is not to even mention how many lives were saved and families spared from the heartache of losing loved ones to preventable lifestyle illnesses. This remarkable achievement inspired Robb to devote his life to bringing this health potential to the world. The Healthy Rebellion, a private community of like-minded change makers, is the first step. Robb's goal with the Healthy Rebellion is to help 1 million people achieve lifelong health and freedom from the clutches of the sick care system. The show notes for this episode and all previous episodes of Health Coach Radio can always be found at primalhealthcoach.com/radio. This is an awesome chat. We talk about a lot of things. It's always a pleasure to have some real talk with Robb Wolf, so let's go. Hi, Robb. Welcome to the show. We're excited to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me. I am honored to bring down property values anytime somebody will let me do it, so thanks.
Yes. Well, I just personally want to thank you because, and we're not going to get too deep into the weeds on this, but yours was the first book I read when I decided I wanted to start taking control of my health when the conventional wisdom failed me.
Awesome.
Yours was the first book I read, and I wanted to learn how my body worked, and you taught me that. And I think that's empowerment. That's empowering. And that's what health coaches do. We empower our clients to understand their bodies, understand that their health is in their control. So I just want to personally thank you for that. Since that book, a lot has happened with you. A lot of things have changed. You've gone through a lot of different stuff. Can you give us the rundown? What's going on with you right now? What are some of your big projects that you're working on right now?
Oh man, so we are maybe a month and a half into launching the Healthy Rebellion, which is a I guess kind of a membership portal with the goal of helping to extricate 1 million people out of the sick care system. And it sounds like kind of a lofty idea, and it is, but the way that I define getting out of the sick care system is getting yourself out of the third-party payer scenario, which in the US is more germane than perhaps your situation, being plugged into some sort of a functional medicine healthcare provider, be that a health coach, like a primal coach, or more of a primary care provider. And then also my definition of this is really having a pinpoint understanding of what your metabolic health actually is. Awesome. And so we did a 2-year pilot study ages ago, 7 years ago, with the Reno Police and Fire Department, identified 40 people at high risk for type 2 diabetes But based off the changes in that, the blood work with these folks, the pilot study saved the city of Reno about $22 million with a 33-to-1 return on investment. And so what this advanced testing allows us to determine is really kind of where your metabolic health is, kind of your metabolic flexibility. And then we can be somewhat dietary agnostic as to how we tackle things from there, but there's also kind of a reality that some things work better than others. And so if somebody wants to be vegan or something like that, we'll kick the tires on it. But if their metabolic numbers don't improve the way that we want, then we've got a really powerful case for how to, kind of orient things going forward. And so that's basically what the Healthy Rebellion is a community where we're working together to move these million people out of the sick care system. And then after a 10-year run with the Paleo Solution podcast, we kind of put that to bed and we launched the Healthy Rebellion Radio. We kind of felt like when people were looking for new shows to check out, everybody's kind of made their opinion up as to where they are with like paleo and primal and stuff like that. So some of these things have become a little bit of kind of emotionally reactive buzz terms. And so we had some thoughts around shifting things. And I had wanted to rebrand for probably about 3 years, and I got to think about that and kind of rejiggered it towards the health perspective to be so healthy that your existence is an act of rebellion.
Right. So just so you know, Laura and I are members of the Healthy Rebellion. We joined as soon as the invitation came out.
Thank you. Thank you.
Because I mean, that mission is incredible. And that's what I think, I would imagine all health coaches and fitness nutrition coaches listening to this, we have a desire to get people out of that sick care system. That's our whole raison d'etre. That's why we get up in the morning, right? So really fascinating. I didn't necessarily know that you had this element of like metabolic testing that was involved. Mm-hmm. So what sorts of markers are you looking at with those metabolic tests?
So we really hang a lot of emphasis on what's called the LPIR score, the lipoprotein insulin resistance score. And what we've been able to do over time, we have about 30,000 patients that we've worked with through the clinic. And so we've historically used a very thorough intake that really at the end of the day ends up being kind of like some personal genetic information, like did your parents develop cardiovascular disease or type 2 diabetes? Like with that type of information, plus some studies like the MESA studies and whatnot, plus our ability to use this LPIR score, we've been able to do some really solid correlates with where folks are in a metabolic health perspective. And then over the course of time, applying a little bit of machine learning algorithms, now we're in a spot that we're able to use that thorough questionnaire, but a much more pared down blood work analysis to use as an anchor. Like we actually can discover a remarkable amount about people just based off the questionnaire, because we have enough people that have gone through that we've been able to generate some validation on that. But we still use that LPIR score as kind of a primary benchmark. Like if y'all have read my book, like I talk about things like the A1C and fructosamine and different things so that we can kind of triangulate in on say like blood sugar values or advanced glycation end products over time. But this LPIR score is really slick. It does all of that, but in a much more precise way, less expensive. And it's what's interesting about it is when somebody has an NMR done, it's a particular type of diagnostic tool that's used to screen this particular test. They get zillions of these spikes, and these spikes, when they look at the graph, are representative of different molecules that are in folks' system. Currently, they know some about that, but not a ton about it. And over the course of time, they keep adding more information. So even once we bank the information on somebody, as these tests develop, we can go back in and look at things like they're currently, they have like a 95% accuracy in predicting the likelihood of type 2 diabetes over a 10-year period. And they're developing some algorithms for being able to get like a 20-year predictive value for like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So it's really powerful stuff. And this is, I will ring the bell a little bit on like markets and innovation. When we first were using this type of testing almost 10 years ago, it was close to $1,000, and now it's around $100. So because of innovation and just pumping people through this, the cost has plummeted dramatically on this. And I will throw out there also that this is a test that is generally not covered by insurance, which is part of the reason why it's actually gotten cheaper and better over time.
So could you speak more to, because an LPIR score is not a term I think many people listening are going to really know, like how's it calculated? What goes into it? And how can health coaches or coaches' clients get their hands on having a score like that run? And then it's like a three-part question. And then what do we do with it as health coaches?
Right. Great stuff. And so I'll back up a little bit. Like when folks go and get a standard blood panel, we get like total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, triglycerides.
Right.
You might get something like a CBC, a complete blood count. You might get something called a CMT, which is a complete metabolic, or CMP, complete metabolic panel, which is kind of like sodium, potassium. It covers a lot of stuff. And these things can be helpful, but most of the time what is being looked at, like your LDL cholesterol count isn't actually directly measured. They use something called a Freewald equation to calculate it. And depending on how you're eating or kind of what you have going on, things like your triglycerides can change in the shape and morphology a little bit. And so these things can actually get kind of cross-referenced with each other. And so they're not that accurate. And I think most folks in your program are going to be familiar with some notions like every day when people succumb to a heart attack or a stroke, 40 to 60% of those people had low normal cholesterol levels. So although cholesterol is a player in this story, it's a lot more complex to that. And what is happening, lipid-like substances don't travel around the body by themselves. They need to get packaged up in these things called lipoproteins that have kind of a water-soluble protein on the outside, and then the triglycerides and cholesterol and lipids get moved around on the inside. And so what we usually look at or are educated about is HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol. That cholesterol gets moved around the body in lipoproteins, which is LDL lipoprotein, HDL lipoprotein, and there's a bunch of other subfractions with that. And so what an NMR is, ages ago, and this shows how old I am, when MRIs were being used in hospitals, they used to call them NMRs. And what it means is nuclear magnetic resonance imaging. People didn't like the term nuclear because they thought that they were getting, irradiated, Fukushima style or something right like that. And so the term shifted to MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, but it's basically using a magnet to put a massive pulse of magnetism into organic molecules or a body, and it will cause a release of energy. And the signature of that energy release can just precisely identify a molecule. Like it is impossible to mistake, say like glucose for fructose under these circumstances. Like everything has, it's like a fingerprint. And so it's very accurate, very consistent. And what we look at for the LPIR score, the main things that are looked at is the LDL particle count, this very little understood but very powerful inflammatory marker called GlycA, GLYCA. And then there's some other kind of proprietary secret sauce things, like they look at branched chain amino acids and some different things that go into their in-house algorithm. And so this is run through LabCorp. And then what we have done over the course of time, our clinic, Specialty Health in Reno, we will order these tests for folks. And then in addition to just getting the LPIR score, which it's basically a number. And if you have a high insulin resistance score, that's not that great. If it's lower, it's better. And that can give you some feedback about if what you were doing with diet and lifestyle is actually helpful. But what our clinic does that I think is a really enormous value add is you get a written report around the findings. So here's what this stuff is, here's what it means, here are some diet, lifestyle, and even supplementation options that folks can use to try to affect beneficial change based off of what the goals are. And the cool thing around that for health coaches, it very distinctly offloads liability. You're not trying to practice medicine. You're not trying to do predictive testing. This is what this wellness program does. And what you as a health coach can do is to help to interpret that information and then clearly help people to implement the diet, lifestyle, and other changes that would move things in a favorable direction.
Very cool. Wow. That's so cool. Like what's really fun about that for me is that like insulin resistance, as far as I'm concerned, is that's definitely what most of my target clients are struggling with. And previously, the only way I could come to the conclusion that they were insulin resistant if they kind of told me like, oh, I get hangry and my energy tanks and I'm insidiously putting on abdominal fat. And I was like, oh, that sounds like it could be an insulin thing. But this actually gets very specific into the sort of the components of insulin resistance that are at play for each individual person, less of a blanket approach.
Absolutely. And one of the really interesting features is that, so a benchmark that is really commonly used, and it's kind of the defining feature of prediabetes and diabetes, is fasting blood glucose and or A1C. Those things have been kind of the best options that we've had. But the bugger with that is that blood sugars don't elevate until late in the game. People are getting remarkably insulin resistant. They're getting inflamed and they're having problems long before we see blood sugar increases. Once we find someone that their blood sugar, their fasting blood glucose is elevated, or they've got an A1C in the mid 6s or the 7s or something, the horse is out of the barn, the cat's out of the bag, whatever analogies you want to use with that. Like we've gone a long ways down the road to establishing this disease process, whereas that LPIR score can identify that 5, 10, 15 years early. And there's another interesting feature that there are some people that their fasting blood glucose and their A1C is just naturally a little bit on the elevated side. And people can get really concerned about that, but there's a whole cross section of people that their A1Cs look a little elevated, their fasting blood glucose looks a little elevated. They never go on to become type 1 diabetic or type 2 diabetics. Whereas you have a lot of people that their blood glucose looks pretty good until it doesn't. And you can identify all of that quite early using something like the LPIR score.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because what I'm wondering here with this score, because we get like in our own little community, we'll get a lot of our coaches either share their blood work or, they're confounded by, hey, my client adopted keto or a primal lifestyle and now they're LDL, whatever. They've got all these panels and I think what a lot of that really misses is context, right? When is elevated LDL a problem, or is it a problem in the absence of some of these other markers? Right. And so what this sounds like to me is this score kind of takes things and puts it in context and then creates a more reliable score relative to risk rather than relying on bad cholesterol, right? As a marker.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, a really nice example of that, and again, kind of going back to the knowledge that lipoproteins are kind of like a vehicle that moves the cholesterol passengers around. So we can have two individuals that have an LDL cholesterol, an LDL-C of 100, both of them, but one person may have an LDL particle count of 3,000. The other one may have an LDL particle count of 1,000. And the analogy would be the person with the particle count of 1,000, they basically have buses that are carrying large amounts of cholesterol around the body, and there's relatively few of them. And they tend to be much less atherogenic than the analogy of having a bunch of scooters driving one or two people around that are potentially much more atherogenic. And so this is one of this is called discordance, where folks can have what looks to be either normal cholesterol levels and elevated lipoproteins. These are the police, firefighters, oftentimes, that end up dying suddenly while working because they go undiagnosed because they fly under the radar of conventional testing. And oftentimes that flavor of discordance occurs due to metabolic derangements, mainly from like a hypervigilant state and poor sleep. But then the flip side can also be true. It doesn't happen a ton, but it does happen, where you have folks with high cholesterol levels, but low lipoprotein count. These people are not going to develop a cardiovascular disease, not in any type of time frame that is meaningful. But these are oftentimes the people that are suggested to go on statins and things like that. And maybe a statin is appropriate in certain situations, but that type of discordance, it's really not. Like we're playing to the cholesterol levels when we really should be looking at the lipoproteins. So it is an incredibly valuable tool, and I would say less than 1% of physicians are even aware of it currently.
That's so frustrating.
It's a tragedy. And I mean, I think you now can get the LPIR score in Canada. There's an outfit doing it in the UK, but it's actually not widely available. Also, you can do something else called the ApoB test, which is more broadly available. And it gives you a little bit of insight similar to what the LDLP is. They are kind of similar, but there's no way to calculate the LPIR score using the ApoB the way that you do the LPIR score. But as this stuff gets more expensive to manage, I think that there will be more emphasis put on finding better screening methods to be able to inform this, that, what we're up to much better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very frustrating to me because I'm an advocate for the bewildered health consumer. Like that's, I feel like that if I had an advocacy outreach, it would be people who come to me and say, my doctor says my cholesterol is high. And it's like, oh, here we go. It's like, here we go. It's like, there's so much more to it than that. I honestly, I don't even have a resource. I like everything you just said, Rob, is so detailed and nuanced. It's impossible to imagine wrapping your mind around it in a tangible way to explain it to a worried health consumer who thinks they're going to croak, right? It's right. I wish the doctors would, I mean, whatever, we can talk about this all day, and I don't like to come down on doctors too hard on this podcast, but it would just make it easier.
Yeah, and I mean, it cuts both ways also. There are folks in the kind of paleo, low carb, keto scene that they're of the opinion that so long as insulin levels are low, you are 100% safe from cardiovascular disease. And I don't think that's a credible position at all. I will acknowledge that a person with relatively elevated cholesterol and lipoproteins that is insulin sensitive is a different animal entirely than a dyslipidemic diabetic with elevated blood glucose and inflammatory markers. Without a doubt, those are different people and there's different risk profiles. But it's funny, it's frustrating on both ends of the spectrum. Our gatekeeper medical establishment is not well steeped in this material. And I guess the same thing could be said of our possibly over avant-garde, health informers, where they, being insulin sensitive is good and appropriate glycemic load is good. But it's not implicitly a get out of jail free card for cardiovascular disease. And some people are very flippant with the way that they tackle that. And again, like the 10 or 15 years ago, I had all this figured out. It was all crystal clear, keep your insulin levels low, you're good to go. And over the course of time, like it just gets ever more complex. And we can even, let's say you have a client that responds really favorably to a ketogenic diet, but they happen to be one of these people that the very state of ketosis upregulates cholesterol production at the HMG-CoA reductase enzyme level. So being in ketosis just causes elevated lipoproteins and cholesterol, but they feel great. It addresses a bunch of gut issues. They do all the things like removing dairy, shifting to more monounsaturated fats, but still they have a quite high lipoprotein count. And it's kind of like, okay, what do we do about this. You can do some things like a CIMT, a carotid intimal media thickness score, a coronary calcium score. Those things, again, are helpful, but even in that scenario, like a completely clear coronary calcium score, 30% of people who suffer a heart attack had a clean coronary calcium score. So again, a clean coronary calcium score, it's looking at calcification within the vascular lumen. And we really don't want that to happen, but calcification is a late stage process in the atherogenic development. We could be riddled with early atherogenic lesions that can then, like, their apical cap can peel and you can get a thrombic event and all that type of stuff. So some days I just kind of want to hide under my bed and not even talk about it anymore, because it just gets more and more and more complex.
Yeah. It's like the more you know, the more you realize what you don't know.
Yeah.
It's the way I feel every day.
I have a question though, because I was really intrigued when you were telling us a few minutes ago about this work you're doing, and that using machine learning, you can be more predictive now, like 10 to 20 years, you can sort of preemptively predict this stuff. So I would just get my wheels turning. A few weeks ago, we chatted with an 18-year-old gal named Haley Thomas, who's an advocate for children's health. Youth health advocate. It's hard to say youth health advocate, but anyways. And she gave us some staggering statistics on childhood obesity and childhood diabetes. Have you, I mean, are you thinking of it in that way? Like if we can use this testing on kids, we can get ahead of,
honestly, I had not, but that's an obvious application.
Yeah.
And that predictive part of that is actually at the LabCorp level. Like those folks develop this test and they use things like the HOMA IR scores, the MESA studies to validate this. So using the existing kind of methodology for determining cardiovascular disease risk, insulin resistance or sensitivity, they use that to validate this LPIR score. And remind me and I'll send you, they're technical, but some very good papers on what the LPIR score is, how it's calculated, what the history is, and you could drop that in the show notes. Yeah.
Well, and what would be so, like, it's so exciting to imagine if you were to be able to get ahead of metabolic disease in kids, that right off the bat, that's solving a large part of this growing epidemic. Right. And then, like, what if you could even go like prepartum, like you can start testing moms before they even give, like, I mean, it's actually really, you can actually imagine that this scourge could be stopped in its tracks. Like, I feel like it's within reach.
Right. And again, kind of an interesting feature of this very objective score. Let's say we have a 12-year-old boy who maybe he's overweight, maybe he's not, but we do the screen and he's like, he was significantly overweight and he had he maxed out the insulin resistance score. Like he was clearly more insulin resistant than what the score went up to, but he basically maxed it out. Like and I don't understand enough of it to be able to explain this well, but it was basically, if 100 is the high score, it was on a J curve passing 100. Like it was so obvious, like the kid may have had an LPIR score of like 5,000 or something, like we just don't know what it was. But the parents were kind of reticent around dietary change. They had some of their own health issues. And so initially we were able to be somewhat hands-off, where it's like, well, what do you guys feel like you could do? And they did a little bit of tinkering, and then we retested, and it didn't really move the needle at all. And so then we were able to get in and say, okay, well, as a beginning, let's remove all soda out of the mix and all like sugared beverages out of the mix, and let's run that for a month and then retest. It's not a pretty good bump with that. And then it's like, well, little Jimmy's still overeating. Well, little Jimmy doesn't eat much protein. So let's make sure he gets protein at every meal, and he can have some other stuff, but he's got to eat the protein first. This is what I call the speed bump method. Eat that first, then we'll talk about, we've got some negotiating room for this other stuff. We got little Jimmy, and his name's not little Jimmy, but we'll just call it that. But we got him eating a decent whack of protein 3 times a day. That kid started leaning out. He started growing again because I don't know that his growth plates were completely closed, but elevated insulin levels cause early growth plate
Wow.
closure. So this is another a big deal in this stuff. He started growing again. He felt way better. And then I think the last time we checked him, his LPIR score was like 35 or something like that.
Wow.
And so it was a shocking change, but we didn't need any opinion pieces about where the diet needed to go. It's like, this kid does not handle carbohydrate. And at a minimum, he needs more protein to provide more satiety so that we can reduce his calorie load. And oh, by the way, this kid doesn't do well with carbs. And I know that like in the evidence-based nutrition scene, they're like, it's just calories. And if you just don't overeat, then you're good to go. And it's in a metabolic ward, I guess that works when somebody is basically like, you're locked in a room and they feed you what they feed you and you have no options to go raid the refrigerator or drive to the 7-Eleven and buy stuff. But in the real world, this stuff matters. And some people do better on high carbs, some people do better on high fat. But the cool thing about some objective testing like this is you can be agnostic in the beginning. But then when shit doesn't work, then it's like, okay, we're going to modify along this direction. And there's really not a lot of argument around it.
Proof is in the pudding, right?
Yeah.
Those are two tools I use all the time too, which is, first of all, the crowding out method is huge, right? And prioritizing protein for whatever, you eat your protein first, the rest of the appetite kind of falls in line, and cravings go away. These are just great kind of coaching tools for people that just are tending to overeat. But we see it all the time too. We have a 13-year-old boy that started coming into I own a CrossFit affiliate and, a couple towns over. 13, he's getting his ass out of bed and getting to the 6 o'clock class before school. And it's made a difference in him. He's lost some weight and he really hasn't done much to his diet, but now they're starting to ask because now he loves it and he wants to get better and he's working really hard. And that's what I keep telling to him. I keep saying, Jamie, this is what you've got to put first. And so he's slowly starting to do it and it's making a difference.
That's awesome.
And so this LPIR score, these are tests. So at $100 a pop, it's not cheap, but it's not outrageous.
I think that's our clinic price. And because we do a ton of them, it may be cheaper that way. So don't 100% quote me on that, but it's reasonably inexpensive. And you could spend a similar amount on a standard panel and not know much of anything because it really doesn't inform you that well. So yeah.
So does a doctor have to order that test, or is there a way that some people can go to LabCorp?
The thing that people get jammed up on is they want insurance to cover it, and you do need a doctor to prescribe it if you want insurance to cover it. But if you're willing to go out of pocket, then I think you can just go into a LabCorp and get it. I'm pretty sure. Yeah. So the if you get a test from LabCorp, you get the results.
Okay.
If you run that through Specialty Health in Reno, which again, I can fire you guys a link to that stuff. You get this really nicely written report that interprets all that stuff and actually provides some lane lines for. So like every once in a while, we get some folks that. They have hypertriglyceridemia, like super high triglyceride levels. That's someone I wouldn't recommend do a low carb diet, or I would be very careful with it. I would make it high protein, as much carbs as you could tolerate, and keep the fat pretty moderate. Because then within this written report, we can say, hey, we would recommend this route versus this route. And here's the reason why. And again, the cool thing with that is we can kick the tires on it, give it a shot, retest, and then kind of see how things go.
Right. Yeah. Because that's what I could see is you get the score and not know what to do with it. So where do you go to get it deciphered? Yeah. And I think for health coaches, we have to be careful. In some places, you might be perfectly within your scope, and given past training, you might be perfectly capable of being able to decipher that. But for those coaches that either legally can't do that where they are and don't have that skill set, there's a place that they can go through this clinic in Reno where they can have those results interpreted, and then the coach can pick up the ball.
Yep.
Cool.
And I mean, that's the way even their in-house coaching process works. You get the written report that comes from the doctors and the nurse practitioners, and then our staff of health coaches mainly just help people to understand what the report is saying, and then to implement the changes that make sense within their goals. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So just going back to sort of the origin of the Healthy Rebellion, just changing gears completely here, if you're cool with that.
Yeah.
You moved this whole thing onto another social platform. So you're working this off of Mighty Networks, you're abandoning Facebook, and I know Instagram's probably next on the bubble for you too. Can you talk a little bit about that, why you went to Mighty Networks and what's going on there?
Yeah, so we were part of that dust up with the midsummer Google algorithm update. And we had noticed something kind of wacky, like we have the Keto Masterclass. It's been selling well for a while. We would sell it on Facebook through the Facebook ad deal. And it was literally, it was like the thing fell off a cliff. And Nikki's pretty good at this stuff. She's like, wow, I don't know what's going on. And then we hired what is recognized to be the largest, bestest, most expensive Facebook ad agency in the world. And we're like, you guys give it a shot. And these folks could exactly sell it for break even and nothing else. Like, it was just kind of magical. Whatever the price was, which basically what was going on is Facebook gets paid their ads and you don't make any actual money off of it. And then there was the Google update where, my 12 years of blogging and hundreds of posts that maybe not like super popular, but they were front page returns on different things like Hashimoto's, thyroiditis, and gluten, and there was all this kind of long tail stuff there. But you get up one day and 97% of your traffic is gone, and people are effectively blinded to the ability to find anything that you've done. I did a review of the movie What the Health, and that was one of my most popular blog posts, because my review historically on Google was either number 1 or number 2 return for What the Health for review. Either you put in What the Health and it was like 3rd or 4th on that page. If you put in What the Health review, it was the number 1 return. With the algorithm update, I think it's like page 38 or something like that that my review pops up on. So it's a pretty valuable resource, whether you agree with me or not. Like, you could make the argument that it's thoroughly done and at least it's a beginning of conversation point and stuff like that. So that stuff kind of disappeared, and I was like, okay, is this when we go and farm coconuts or do something else? But I've been working on scaling this risk assessment program for the better part of 10 years. And we did work with the Chickasaw Nation, we've done work with other entities, and I've learned a ton. And it was kind of like, well, we'll give this a shot. Like, we'll launch this Healthy Rebellion and create an environment that ideally you get all of the good from network effects and social connectivity. But as we interact with each other, there's not an algorithm that's pitting us at each other's throats and guaranteeing that we can't, have a moment of commonality between us. And so we gave that a shot. We're about a month and a half into it. It's gone pretty well so far. We definitely need to get more folks in there to kind of, I think in some ways, you need like a critical mass for like a village to be a village and stuff like that. And so we need some more bodies in there just for the kind of aliveness and dynamicism of basically like an online village. But the Mighty Networks interface is interesting. It's kind of like a good social media platform, medium, and a really well-designed old school forum software all had a baby. So like the user interface is nice. The ability to communicate and help people is really, really valuable. And honestly, the Mighty Network setup is maybe best suited for something like a 30-day transformation or something. Like, it's really nicely set up for things like that. There are a lot of yoga courses and things like that live on that Mighty Networks interface. But the woman who founded it, Gina Bianchini, she's really interesting, pretty outspoken about liberty and markets and kind of some concerns around where all of this stuff has been going on. kind of the macro level. So I decided to kind of draw a line in the sand, and I was kind of like, if the work that we provide is good and people value it, then this thing will thrive and go on. And if not, then it's time for me to do my coconut farm in Nicaragua, and I'll punch the time clock and I'll be done. So, but so far it's motoring along pretty well. And the Healthy Rebellion Radio, we have kind of an interesting format. We have our Q&A format. We do a little bit of expert interviews, but it's really targeted. It's folks that are really good at something practical. Like we had Emily Fletcher from Ziva Meditation, and she led everybody through a meditation, and it was really, really good. And then we also do a live call-in show. And so that has gone really well, and folks have really enjoyed it because they get a remarkable amount of personalization with that. You know, when you write in a question or phone in, and then I can kind of dig deeper and help people, you know, hopefully uncover whatever is stymieing them in their current endeavors.
Oh, so are you getting like health consumers asking you questions about their health? Who calls into the show typically?
I mean, right now it's heavy with people that are part of the Healthy Rebellion, but, you know, we do drip it out to social in general. But, you know, it's interesting. We get a lot of entrepreneurs, and that may be because we've done the shows during the middle of the day thus far. And so we're going to do some shows that are like weekends in the evening to kind of open this stuff up for other folks. But we've had a lot of people in the military, a lot of entrepreneurs. And, you know, it's funny, it's been disproportionately men, where normally women are like the early adopters and the folks that tend to disproportionately populate different forums and stuff like that. It's mainly been men calling in, ironically. So it's been interesting who the demo is on that.
Cool.
Yeah, you know, social media is such a quagmire for me. I find it highly addictive, just personally, right? I mean, CrossFit can totally pulled out of it, like off it, right? And except Twitter, I guess, because of a lot of what you're saying, you know, just the nonsense that goes on there. But at the same time, right now, that's where your audience lives. So how do you, as an entrepreneur, be totally off it, right? But I can see the framework. What I'm seeing you do is using it to let people know, hey, now I'm over here, right? And using it as best you can, get the most out of it that you can. But then over time, I think there's a lot to be said for people eventually sucking it up, paying a little bit of money for a membership site so that somebody else doesn't determine what it is you see. And how you get your information.
Yeah. And you know, it's interesting because my kind of superpower is content generation and kind of taking information from lots of different areas and maybe synthesizing it and putting it together. And that's great. But information has become a commodity, and commodity goes to the lowest common denominator, you know, the lowest price. And so there is a strong sense in the world that everything should be for free. You know, if you want information on a ketogenic diet, just go look on YouTube, and a quick search, you get 750,000 returns on that. That's amazing. Are you still able to get anything out of it that moves the ball forward for you? You know, and I have a pretty modest house, pretty modest car, but I invest a lot in my personal coaching. Like I'm part of a couple of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu groups online, and my travel is typically tied into going to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, as well as some business and personal development stuff. And that's definitely, you know, I'm fingers crossed that there's enough people out there that are willing to reinvest in themselves. And also the feedback that we've had within the Healthy Rebellion, that people legitimately enjoy it. Like it's all of kind of the good that we occasionally got out of social media, but it's not the cocaine scroll where you're just like going and going. Like people check in, they see what I've done in the lab. The lab is kind of a geekier area where I go a little bit more deeper and more technical. And then we have more of a general area, and they can kind of check in, see what's happening, get some good information, kind of stay up to speed and what's happening. If they have some questions or they're just having an off day, they can be like, my day sucked today, I need a hug, and they'll get a fucking hug, you know. It's like it's really good in that regard. But people have reported that they're online like 3 to 5 hours less a week at least, just because they like drop in, check things out, get some good info, maybe ask some questions, maybe post some stuff that they've seen themselves, and then they split and they go live the rest of their life. And I've noticed just in myself, like my tolerance for social media, even Instagram. I mean, there's so many hot girls on there. Like the scroll is that should be like easy sell, and I'm just like, man, I'm over it. Like I can't really stand it. And so it's been cool for me. It's been pretty liberating because it's freed up a big chunk of time, and it's kind of nice. The people who've signed up there, they've taken a major gamble on me and a major risk and invested a lot, in my opinion. And so it's like, well, man, I'm going to double down and give you everything I possibly can to make this worth your while. So it's kind of cool. It really targets that down. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Really nice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the big issue, and this is a rabbit hole that's probably not worth going down, but like the censorship, specifically on Facebook, the reason why I'm bringing it up is because, again, health coaches, we're advocates for health consumers. And just like we were talking about earlier, I can't count how many clients come to me bewildered about their blood lipid panels, but also I can't count the number of clients who come to me bewildered about what are we supposed to eat to support human life and the planet. I guess we're supposed to eat plants now. Whatever your belief is about that, I get it. But I had this experience in a private Facebook group where I had my client community. Somebody asked a question about that. Like, Aaron, you're telling us to eat protein, but I keep hearing about all this, how it's bad for the planet. And in the effort to merely educate, not to be dogmatic or be weirdly like conspiracy theorists, I shared some Savory Institute articles. I shared some of Diana Rogers' articles. The whole post disappeared. Yeah. The group got shut down.
You're kidding? Your private group?
It's like, okay. Yes.
Wow.
It got shut down. It was like temporarily.
Yeah.
I was blocked because I was in conflict of their whatever it is, terms of service.
Terms of service, yeah. Which they make those so broad that like just having a pulse could put you in violation of their terms of service. And so it's interesting. I had a guy reach out to me who had a @Google email, and he's like, I work for Google, and it appeared that he did. He didn't work in the algorithm update. He worked somewhere else, but he was like, tell me about all this stuff. Like, I'm really curious about it. And so I forwarded to him the articles around like the people like Mercola, like that whole big piece that a couple of folks did about everybody that kind of got nuked on that. And it's interesting. So on the one hand, with Facebook, I think that there absolutely is almost some kind of like politically motivated curation and censorship of what's going on. I think there might be something like that going on with Google as well. But this guy made a really interesting observation, which I find it's both liberating on the one hand, because like when you wake up one day and you're like, wow, Facebook and Google hate me and they want to see me like removed from the planet. Like that's kind of a little bit of a spooky proposition. But he was of the opinion that really what has happened is Google created an environment where people like myself, like you, like y'all, like Mark, can generate amazing content and build a following and then sell things to people. But what Google decided and what Facebook potentially has decided is, yeah, you're going to have to play in our ecosystem. So you need to buy ads, and there's a pay to play kind of feature to that. And so this guy was of the opinion that this was much less about specific censorship than it was just Google saying, yeah, there's no more free lunch and you're gonna pay one way or the other. And it was really interesting. A guy signed up for the Healthy Rebellion. We had talked a little bit on Instagram. He used to have a Facebook group that was 120, 150,000 people, and he's a swim coach. And he had developed a very vibrant business around online coaching for swimming, discussing technique and programming and all this stuff. And he showed up one day and his community was gone. he had somehow violated the terms of service. And what his thought was, he's like, this is swimming. Like, it's a pretty non-controversial thing. They had just ceased to allow him to have what was basically a free business on their platform. So this is something to noodle on as health coaches and burgeoning entrepreneurs. You know, where are you going to stick a flag in the ground to be able to rally people around you? I think podcasts may end up being a decent place to do that. Particularly within the iTunes ecosystem, they really haven't gotten into the business of like personal data manipulation and selling it and stuff like that. They just sell good products. That's what they do. So podcasts could be a way of doing things, although podcasting is a very commoditized thing. Also, there's a zillion of them out there. It's hard to kind of break out and have your voice be heard. I could make the case that, say, like entities like myself, like Primal at Large, if they were to create these alternate locations in something like Mighty Networks, or like a ThinkSpot is a new kind of alternative, Patreon, things like that. Although Patreon has trimmed the feathers on some folks that were, you know, they didn't like their politics or didn't like their nutrition. So Patreon's been a little bit curatorial as well. But I think that there would be an opportunity to have some of the Whole30, you know, whatever, these bigger players probably should think about sticking some flags in the ground and kind of creating a bubble around where they are and providing access into that. This gets out in the weeds a little bit, but if you do a little bit of poking around about the future of the browser, so like Firefox or Safari or Chrome or what have you, there's pretty good understanding that they, you know, the big tech players and all that, want to see the browser disappear, because they want you to go into like the Facebook ecosystem and you stay there. You do all your shopping, you order your food, like you have your community, you do your dating, like the whole thing exists there. And to some degree, Google's trying to do that. Like, we've seen this over the course of time where if you type in blueberries nutrition information, where it used to, it was kind of like the top ranked return was what popped up. Now it's kind of a Google curated return.
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good. Maybe it's been bought, you know, nobody's really too sure on that, but it's going to be really interesting. Like, I think getting back and really focusing on developing email lists could be really powerful. I could also see the case that, funny enough, people start existing within their local community. So, you know, like these CrossFit, shocker, you know, you might actually see a resurgence in these things called phone books, you know, and you know, things happening on a local level. But we saw this within CrossFit gyms where some of these folks garnered national and international recognition for like their programming or their athletes or what have you. And that's all well and good, but it meant absolutely nothing to the success of their brick and mortar business, because that was 100% about taking care of the people right in front of you. So this whole thing could turn into like a big story arc where, okay, I'm living in New Braunfels and the bulk of the people maybe I interact with and provide value to are in New Braunfels, Austin, you know, within an hour and a half drive or something like that. And so I mean, there will always be ways around this, and it could be a story where the pendulum swings away from this highly online presence to more of like an in-person presence, which I think would probably be amazing in general. But it's something that folks definitely need to put some thought towards. And it sucks because in addition to everything else you have to do as a small entrepreneur, you know, this is kind of another piece to kind of noodle on. But it's something that I would encourage people to keep an eye on as we go forward.
The way we've articulated it in the past is like, go to business as though Facebook and Instagram might cease to exist for you. And so that is bringing it back to the sort of quaintness. Like, quaintness could be a website and an email list, or it could even come back further than that. It could be quaintness could be like just in your community. But I think it's important for any health entrepreneurs to just kind of think about that big picture, because it
Right.
seems like it's becoming more reality.
Oh, yeah.
There's going to be a lot of change for sure. Like what we did 10 years ago, 5 years ago, it's not working today, and it won't exist 5 or 10 years from now. Yeah.
I feel like that phenomenon happens faster and faster and faster. Where it used to be, 10 years ago it was this. Now it's, just 5 years ago it's this. And we're going to see things change. And I think often, like in this space in particular, there's, the internet, Facebook, and all of this stuff has been great as far as just access to information, but it's also been a double-edged sword. Access to too much information, and they don't know what to do with it, right? And so this is where the groundswell needs to happen and being local. And I hear from some coaches, because I act as admissions director for our course too. So I'm talking to people that are just kind of like, hey, can I do this? And I hear from people a lot of times, like, I live in a small town. There aren't a lot of people here. Who's going to pay me? And I'm like, do the people in your area want to be healthy like everybody else? So there's a way that you could structure your business to appeal to the local population and make it affordable for them. But the whole point of this is getting out there and building a sense of community. We've gotten sort of used to building these online communities because it's easier, right? There's less taken from us, at least perceived, right? Versus something locally where I have to be face to face with somebody. But I really think we're giving something up. We're sacrificing something else by trying to build that community online. And I do think there's room for both.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know where it will all play out, but I think having a little resource allocation both directions would be really, really smart. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. There's like a YMCA in every small little town,
There's a Rotary, there's churches, there's youth groups, like there's a lot of different avenues where people are already kind of looking at kind of doing social good. And so if there's a way to plug into that and provide value, then that could definitely be, some legit avenue. Let's say not a lot of people can pay $50 or $100 an hour or whatever for health coaching or whatever that is. You could probably wrangle a lot of groups of five to 10 people that can pay $5 to $10 an hour and have like kind of a group sit down and you move people through this stuff. And yeah, that's a lot of work. But then, with the online piece, maybe you do something like Mighty Networks and you start batching people into groups and they sign up in there. And so you have a live in person and then you have the online interface also. And so there's, and again, none of this is going to be easy, but it could be really viable. And that in-person part might actually make it much more sticky. It's very easy for people to sign up in an impersonal environment and then just split, whereas like if you build some solid community, we've seen that with jujitsu schools, CrossFit gyms, like people are reticent to leave because that becomes their extended, social network.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, well, it's a good thing for coaches to keep their finger on the pulse of, because it's changing very quickly, like we've seen. So just to kind of pull back though, the regenerative agriculture stuff that I had shared on my Facebook group that got shut down. You're working on a project with Diana Rogers on that. How's that going?
It's going well. Other than some days I kind of feel like I need to hang myself with a extension cord or something. It's funny. We're just suggesting that animal inclusive agriculture could be a viable solution to climate change and food security and stuff like that. I've been called a Nazi. I've been called a Holocaust denier. We've had a couple of death threats around this stuff. I've had my children threatened. What? And so, yeah. And, like Diana, it has spent enormous amounts of personal resources to get this thing going. And if the book does really well, we might do okay on some royalties with the book, but who really knows with that? She's never going to see a red cent out of the movie. You don't make movies to make money unless you're James Cameron or something like that. And you own a pea protein company on the back end. This thing's really been a passion project because nobody else has really chosen to come in and like champion this discussion and try to button up the health, environmental, and ethical considerations for eating meat in general, but better meat in particular. And so, I mean, it's good in that I think the film is going to be beautiful and amazing. I'm actually really impressed with the book. If we had another year to work on it, it would be like one of those Malcolm Gladwell, like super amazing, where it's got like background story and like, Mexico City, 1935, Morgan Burlog was getting off of a plane, like stuff like that. We have some of that. And so there's pieces of the book that I would say are genius, really good, just like, great background story. And it makes this really complex and tough material very accessible. But there's sections that are just, for me, good, but not great. And another year of work on it would, in my opinion, make it great. But the people that have reviewed it so far said it's amazing. And like there's nothing currently like it that really buttons up all of those topics and does it in kind of a contiguous way. And we kind of have to do that, because when you start discussing this, then the game that I call vegan whack-a-mole occurs.
Mm-hmm.
We'll talk about health, and you start addressing the health things, and then what about ethics? And then the ethics thing pops up, and you start addressing ethics. And it's like, well, grazing animals are going to destroy the planet due to climate change. And then you got to address that. And then you're back to health. And so what's interesting, though, is that for the most part, something that looks like an ancestral-based diet with grazing animals being kind of central to this thing appear to offer the best nutrient density, might offer the best solution with regards to a sustainable food system. And for me, a sustainable food system is one that we could come back 5,000 years from now, and it's still largely running the way it's running, and the ecosystem adjacent to it is still healthy and vibrant. And I'll go out on a limb and say that the row crop centric industrial food system that goes into like Impossible Burger and stuff like that, that is not a sustainable food system, even though it's being marketed as such. And then interestingly, from this ethical perspective, it actually represents the least harm. The least damage, the least death occurs under that kind of circumstance. And then there's all kinds of other potential knock-on benefits, like a really vibrant, decentralized local economy where we produce and consume more of our food at a local level versus like shipping it all over the planet. So I'm optimistic about it, but we have a lot of work to do, and it's an asymmetric war. The vegans just kind of like throw a hand grenade over the fence, or like, meat causes cancer, boom, and they run, and then you're left with a PhD dissertation to unpack that. And meat causes climate change, and you throw it over the fence and you run. And then again, you're in this reactionary mode. And also just kind of politically, the notion of a meat inclusive diet, and that it could be really favorable for climate change considerations, is a really controversial topic. Like it's so we'll see. It's due out July 2020. So we'll see how all that stuff plays out. But I'm really excited, but it's just been a lot of work. And like we've taken a pretty good ass kicking doing it. Like it's been rough. Yeah.
Honestly. July 2020, that's the book launch or the movie launch, or both?
I believe both. Tentatively, that's going to be both. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my hat goes off to you. It's got to be exhausting. Like, I think that's kind of where you're getting at with the extension cord comment. Like, wow.
And it's been far tougher for Diana than for me, because I'm kind of a big jerk and I navigate this stuff pretty well. But, it's been interesting. Like, even Diana, she's gotten a remarkable amount of kind of misogyny around this, where she will argue with people, and she's thoughtful and articulate and lays out a case. And I would be in the same thread making the same case, and I wouldn't remotely have my feet held to the fire the same way that she did. And it's always men towards her, and they're always super condescending, and they seem kind of threatened that this woman is like secure in the facts that she's presenting and stuff like that. And the kind of funny thing is the guys are really pushing back when you poke around on their kind of bios or whatever. They're like these kind of crunchy social justice warrior guys, and they are absolute dicks to her.
Yeah.
And it's been really interesting. And that's one of these things that for her has been, I don't want to speak for her too much, but too few people understand how much Diana has suffered in the process of developing this book and movie. Like, she has really taken on an enormous amount doing this thing. But this was something that we were like, okay, yeah, the vegans are going to have some slings and arrows. We get that. Like, it's a complex topic. We get that. But this kind of like overt, ugly misogyny that's coming out of the kind of crunchy social justice warrior guys has been really interesting and really ugly. But we've also documented virtually all of it and just cataloged it. And so at some point, we're going to start dropping that stuff back out on the interwebs. And it's like, well, vegan dude 2135, here you go. You know, here's your contribution to the world. So yeah.
Well, I just like, I publicly thank her. I would love to get her on this podcast, actually, mental note, but we haven't asked her because we know she's so freaking busy. Right?
Once the book and film are ready to roll, I would get her on then. Yeah, okay. That would be awesome.
Get her on. Because I mean, I literally remember thinking just a couple of years ago, thinking, why doesn't somebody come out with a movie about, like, why is it always the vegan? I say, look, I've got friends of mine that are vegan, family members that are vegan. They're not like that. They're not militant and calling me, you know, a hateful person because I like eggs or I'll eat meat. You know, they're not like that. It's like any kind of extreme side of any movement that makes the most noise and is the most disruptive. And I'm like, God, we need someone on our side. But everyone's just kind of sitting here like, I don't want it to be me, you know? And she's taking it on and you've taken it on. And I love that.
I want to see a moderate, like just a really moderate health documentary. Like, that would be great.
Well, you know, so the documentaries that have been done kind of in our community so far are low carb. And like, I'm a huge fan of low carb diets, but I think they have, in my opinion, kind of missed the boat in that not everybody does well on a low carb diet. Right. And, you know, the flip side, you know, some people do great on a higher carb diet. And so they really focused exclusively on this kind of low carb angle, which again, it's an amazing tool. It's one of the main tools I use, but there have been some folks that have done some pretty good films, but I feel like they kind of reduce their credibility, kind of put themselves into a little bit of a cul-de-sac because they were, you know, they were just all about this kind of low carb angle. We put forward this nutrient density, nutrivore perspective, and then a little bit out of Wired to Eat. How do you do with your carbohydrate load? And let's think about immunogenic foods a little bit. But then beyond that, we're pretty dietarily agnostic. And we have some things like, in researching the nutrient quality of, say, grass-fed meat versus conventional meat, it's not that big of a difference.
Right.
And we've had people kind of lose their minds at us and get really cranky and angry. And so that's been another kind of interesting thing, is even our own tribe doesn't like different elements of what we have in here because it's not the perfect story like the vegans sell. It's like, veganism fix all of your health issues, and it is the most morally superior way to go, and it's going to fix the environment. Like, boom, alpha, omega, done. And when we look at what we're recommending, we're concerned about, you know, the CAFO food production system and whatnot. We don't think it's sustainable. We don't think it's the best thing for animal a life experience and whatnot, but also there's kind of a reality that just meat is nutritious, period. Right. And grass-fed dairy is much more nutritious. Pastured eggs are more nutritious. Wild-caught fish is far more nutritious. But the reality is that even CAFO beef spends 85 to 90% of its life eating grass and then is grain finished. Yeah. And that's not good, but it's such a minor input relative to its total life cycle that there's just not that big of a difference at the end of the day. And man, we've had folks really angry about that and questioning whether or not we got this thing right, which is kind of funny because I tell you, we tried every way possible to manipulate the data to paint a more rosy story on this. And I'm like, do you think I'm an idiot? Like, you don't think I want to tell this story, you know? And so there's kind of that piece, but I'm also a little bit hopeful that maybe some credible reviewers will see things like this and they're like,
Right.
oh, they're not just doing a whitewash on all this stuff,
Right.
you know, like in the fact that we're going to get some pushback from people, you know, in our tribe will be a little bit interesting. But one of the big challenges, some of the people that have been most vocal are actually small scale grass-fed meat producers. And they're like, people mainly eat it for the perceived health benefits. And the environmental and ethical considerations are there, but they're not the thing that makes people feel justified in spending more money on this stuff. And so then I feel like a bad person because I'm potentially undermining the kind of economic drive that people may have for supporting their local grass-fed meat people. So yeah, man, some days I just look at the bottle of tequila and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to drink that whole thing. And I'm good. So.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, that piece about the grain finishing, I only just learned that myself when Diana and yourself kind of talked it up, and it was like, oh, that's interesting. Well, that's good to know, because a lot of people honestly can't afford or, you know, for whatever reason, don't have access to grass-fed meat. And it's like, good news that the nutritional profile is not that different. But I remember a guy coming after Diana on one of her Facebook posts, and I presume an ancestral health guy. It's a zealot of the ancestral health following. He's like, well, but Diana, you need to read the research on omega-3 to omega-6 ratio. And it's like, dude, really? She's writing a book. She's making a movie. I like, honestly.
It's so funny. Like, this is one of those really interesting things. Grass-fed meat does have more omega-3s than omega-6, but a finger-sized piece of salmon has more total omega-3s than like 8 pounds of beef. Yeah. So like, if you're having a discussion around omega-3, and so it's like, okay, if you eat grass-fed beef, then for the love of God, never have a walnut or an almond, because you just completely blew your omega-3, omega-6 ratio, you know? And so, and she actually pointed that out to the guy, and he was like, huh, okay, I remember that exact discussion, you know, and he was kind of like rocked back on his heels, because like, here it is, man. And the ratio is different, but the magnitude is trivial. There's just not that much there, particularly compared to just like a piece of salmon or like mackerel or something like that. So yeah.
Well, and I think for me too, the way these animals are treated, and that kind of stuff is important to me, and it's why I'm willing to pay a little bit more, you know. But it's also part of the reason why I don't freak out if I'm at a restaurant and I order a burger without a bun and I'm just getting, you know, whatever. I would rather opt for the beef at a restaurant than the salmon at a restaurant.
Yeah, you know, so we not to divert this too far, but Leonardo DiCaprio has this film Before the Flood, and he gets in, talks about climate change, and they paint a cattle production in a super negative light, and then his recommendation is to eat chicken.
Oh my gosh.
And this is millions of dollars spent. Chickens, even organic chicken, all they eat is grain, and all that is derived from is from the industrial, you know,
oh my gosh,
food inputs. And so like it was so mind-blowing, and it's actually cool in a way, because even somebody who is maybe kind of a dyed-in-the-wool vegan, like, this is one of those things where it's like, come on, man, are you really saying we should eat more chicken versus beef when you look at like the food inputs and everything? But this is, you know, world famous person, super wealthy, well-made movie that was supported by the National Geographic Society and Netflix and all this stuff. And the whole recommendation is wrong, based off the premise that the movie was putting forward in the beginning, you know? So yeah, it's interesting.
I have a fun Leonardo DiCaprio anecdote. Hopefully he doesn't listen to this.
Oh, hopefully he does.
But he was he was filming The Revenant up here where I live, And so where I live, we have these climate phenomena called Chinooks, and it's this warm wind comes over the mountains, and it happens all the time. That's why we live here, because we get these 20-degree temperature swings in the wintertime. The snow melts. It's amazing. We live for them. We live for these Chinooks. So he was here filming that, and we had a Chinook, and all the snow melted, and there's puddles everywhere. And he went into the media and said, I'm in the largest beef producing province in Canada. And look what's happening around me. Glaciers are melting. It's chaos. And it's like, dude, that's a Chinook. That just happens. Like he went into the media and said that the cattle of Alberta were causing this weather phenomenon. It was like, that's embarrassing. Man. Anyway, what a guy. What a guy.
Man.
Oh my God.
You know, the danger with stuff like that is climate change a big concern? Yeah. Having a brain tumor is a big concern. And when your doctor goes in to do surgery on you, you want that individual to have great vision and great dexterity. But when we build a worldview that is a lie to support a narrative, then we're basically conducting brain surgery with a blindfold on and wearing oven mitts. Like we are not operating with the real information that defines our world. And so if we want to effectively address this stuff, we actually have to talk about it and like kind of understand the mechanisms. It's very reminiscent of the way that the kind of industrial food system and the food guide stuff changed, where the McGovern Commission, they're having this debate, and the science community was like, we can't support this notion of a low-fat diet. Like the science doesn't support this. And then Senator McGovern said, well, senators don't have the luxury of waiting for all the science to be in. We need to act. And so we have people putting forward the notion that we should be acting right now, but they don't even know what they're doing. And they have no thought around the unintended consequences of making poor decisions and kind of motoring forward. But yeah, I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know.
I know.
Probably the biggest bummer podcast you guys will have ever recorded. And people are like, yeah, but I'm gonna just go drink myself into a stupor now. So
no, but this is, I think that all of this is so important for people in our community and health coaches in general to hear kind of what's happening out there, because the more informed you are, the more you know what to expect, then you can sort of formulate a plan around it, right? So
yeah, you know what? I'll throw something out there really quick. Like I'm kind of committing career suicide already, so I'll just throw it right in there. But the same folks that are having this really non-nuanced discussion around climate change and a host of, and like meat and all this stuff, they tend to be the same people that are very much in that kind of appeal to authority vein, where it's like the only people who should be able to comment on health issues are doctors. And when you really poke around, this is it's kind of like a worldview, and they're very I would say not curious, not particularly creative. They're very deferential to authority. They like the status quo. So even if you are kind of on the fence a little bit with this stuff, I would, when you look around social media and when you interact with people and you see who are the people that are saying that health coaches shouldn't exist, or they should be like highly regulated and stuff like that, they're generally the same people that are having some of these worldviews around a non-nuanced take on animal husbandry and climate change and all this other. There's some other things that go part and parcel with that too. But I would just throw that out there to folks. And so even in a personal self-interest, if you're wanting to be in this space, there are people that don't want you to exist. They don't want you to have the opportunity to help people in this way. And in my opinion, and it's not just my opinion, there's actually great data that supports this trend. The only way we will have a well-functioning wellness system in the future is with a really robust, well-trained group of health coaches that are interface between the general populace and our highly trained, gatekeeper primary care practitioners. It's a non-negotiable feature that we need to have integrated into this.
Because the other model doesn't work.
No,
It's been
no, we've
decades
done
and
it.
decades
We've done
and
60
decades.
years of it. Yeah.
They're just getting worse, right? Because
Right.
you've got these people that are like of the opinion that I am the authority. I'm going to tell you what to do and you're going to go do it. And if you're unsuccessful, it's your fault, not mine.
Right.
There's nobody in the middle to help this end patient who's feeling overwhelmed, bewildered. I even hear it with my health coaching clients, like, Laura, at this point, I know what to do now. Like, why can't I just do it? Because information alone and being told what to do is not enough to change behavior.
Right.
This is where the conduit lies. And this is where health coaches can flourish and will flourish. And thank you for saying that, basically. And because I think there's a lot of people listening to this, that's what they needed to hear, is like an exclamation point at the end of this podcast. You know?
And again, like the battle that we need to fight is this sustainability topic. And I hope in many ways that I'm super wrong about what I'm putting forward in this book, and we get exposed and it's like, oh no, it's much simpler that you just do X, Y, Z, because what we're putting forward is that we need to completely revamp our whole global food production system, which is kind of daunting, but it may also be and it's in fact not the whole global food production system. It's mainly the United States and Europe. Most of the rest of the world, particularly the developing world, generally has a reasonably sustainable infrastructure because of a whole host of reasons. So it's actually not as big in magnitude as what I initially stated, but it's a big deal because these multinational corporations control an enormous amount of power. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole, but you know, if there's a topic that folks maybe should consider championing, we don't need more discussion on whether or not 30 grams of carbs or 50 grams of carbs is a ketogenic diet.
Right.
We don't need that discussion. We need people excited about the nuance of, you know, what is growing meat in a lab going to be more ecologically feasible than sunlight, grass, and herbivores. And let's have a discussion around that. And the people who claim that raising meat in the lab, you show us your data and we'll bring the data that we have, and then let's really hash that out. But people need to get excited about that. And it needs to be like it needs to be as front and center as skinny jeans and abs and Transformation Tuesdays and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
So
Very
the
true.
book and the movie are coming out in July, right?
Yep.
So we should be heads up on that. So Healthy Rebellion, I really want to encourage people to join this. So fill us in on where people can jump in.
Go to join.thehealthyrebellion.com and you can check that out. So far, people have really enjoyed it, and we seem to have a really solid, enjoyable community. Would love to have more people in there, but if this is all we get, then I'm just going to take care of the folks that are there and call it good with that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Rob. This has been such a great educational conversation, and I just want to cheers my electrolyte drink to you for joining us.
Right.
And
We didn't even talk about that.
thank you very much, Rob. It's been really fun, really, you know, overwhelming, but in a good way. You know,
Awesome.
everything that you're doing is overwhelming in a good way, and I mean, obviously, you know, it's overwhelming because you're in it, but just as somebody who's on the front lines working with people, I'm excited for all the stuff you're working on. I
Awesome.
can't wait.
Thank you. It is. You may find me occasionally rocking in the corner, making kind of mewling noises every once in a while, and then I get it together, and then we just kind of rinse, lather, repeat, and keep moving forward. Thank you, and thank you for the awesome work y'all are doing. Like when my first book was still in kind of like its launch phase, and I was traveling the world doing these seminars, people were showing up at my events with like a stack of medical papers, you know, this thick, and out of a group of 200 people, it'd be 20 people with all these problems. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. I can't help you. And so even back then, that's when I started the Paleo Physicians Network, just an attempt at getting practitioners, you know, network together and having people find them. And right on the heels of that, I was, and this was 2009, 2010, I was like, we need a really robust health coaching system. And, I've known that for a long time, and you guys were one of the first entities to really jump in and champion this and do something that's super valuable for folks. So thank you for doing that.
All right.
I love it. We're having a blast. Thank you so much, Rob.
This podcast was brought to you by Primal Health Coach Institute. To learn more about how to become a successful health coach, get in touch with us by visiting primalhealthcoach.com/call. Or if you're already a successful health coach, practitioner, influencer, or thought leader with a thriving business and an interesting story, we'd love to hear from you. Connect with us at hello@primalhealthcoach.com and let us know why we need to interview you for Health Coach Radio. Thanks for listening.